Welcome to a very special program of the Arabic Hour with very special person, an icon of our community, a distinguished lawyer, a public intellectual. We are safe on the road because of him. We are safe on the plains because of him and his family and the people he has influenced. We are in a very special time at this time, especially the way the United States is involved, embroiled in the events in the Middle East. Our community here are in angst and very much concerned about the fate of the old country and their families back in Lebanon and the region. I would like to ask Mr. Nader if he can explain and maybe shine some light on what is motivating the United States in its position and unwillingness to bring about an end to this incredibly violent situation in the Middle East.
Well, it didn't start on October 7th of last year. It started in the 1930s and 1940s, and with the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948, with the full and critical sine qua non backing of President Truman and the U.S. government. The price, as Alfred Lilienthal in his classic book many years ago, What Price Israel, was a dispossession of the lands of Palestinians. They eventually lost about 80% of the original Palestine mandate. Now they have the West Bank and Gaza is in ruins. But in the years since 1948, the Israeli military, with U.S. backing, has towered over the military capabilities of the surrounding Arab countries, as the outcome of the various wars have demonstrated. But after 1967, when Israel took control of the Golan Heights in Syria and took control of the West Bank and Gaza, the Palestinians have been relentlessly dispossessed of land by colonial Israelis moving into the West Bank. They have been embargoed and severely deprived in Gaza, illegal embargo by Israel for many years. They have been subjected to regular violent raids, destruction of homes, so widespread the destruction was objected to by 400 prominent rabbis in the U.S. some years ago in a letter to the Prime Minister, Netanyahu, saying it was against Judaic principles. The water is being stolen. The West Bank has been used as a trash garbage can for toxic chemical dumping by Israel. And the daily harassment, the checkpoints, the arbitrary arrests of thousands of Palestinians, including children and women, and thrown into Israeli jails where they're mistreated and even tortured, according to the Human Rights Watch. They're not called hostages, by the way, but they are hostages.
Yeah.
They have been imprisoned without charges, without trials. They're used as extortion leverage with the extended families in the West Bank, for example.
Yeah.
Part of the Israeli surveillance that the world has never seen in such intensity over the West Bank and Gaza. Then comes October 7th, which never would have occurred, never could have occurred, if mysteriously Netanyahu did not collapse the most sophisticated multi-tiered military defense apparatus in the world on the border with Gaza. They had technological surveillance. They had human spotters whose warnings they ignored. They had the Hamas plans a year before the attack and the border collapse. Why? Well, Netanyahu's obstructing an official investigation, and he's obstructing disclosure of information and interviews, for example, with the female military spotters who were written up a few days ago in the Washington Post as giving warning after warning as they observed heavy training exercises in Gaza, and these warnings were ignored. Now, why? As 6 prominent Israelis in a letter to Congress in June, urging Congress to disinvite Netanyahu from speaking there, stated in their letter, this would not have happened, this attack by Hamas. It could not have happened if it wasn't for the opening of the borders by Netanyahu and his cohorts. So we should always remember that this attack could never have happened by the Hamas militia, which is viewed as an existential threat to Israel. Such an absurdity. They are outnumbered 10 to 1 in soldiers by the Israeli army. They have no air force, no navy, no artillery, no tanks, just rifles and a few grenade launchers smuggled in from the tunnels over the years. And they're exaggerated and viewed as an existential threat in order to destroy the Palestinians in Gaza and leave Gaza destitute as it is now. So the U.S. enters this scene from a long alliance with Israel as their outpost in the Middle East, their oil interests. Israel urged Bush and Cheney strongly to invade Iraq, that criminal invasion of Iraq, a sociocide, killing over 1 million Iraqis and leaving millions as refugees in a destroyed country that never threatened to the U.S. As conservative libertarian Congressman Ron Paul said at the time, Bush and Cheney lied us into Iraq. They lied about Hussein having weapons of mass destruction.
Absolutely.
Continuing forward, the lobby in the U.S. can be called the Israeli government can do no wrong lobby. That is, the AIPAC and other lobbies have totally suspended any independent judgment as American citizens that any Israeli regime can be wrong, can be too brutal, can be too aggressive, can be too imperialistic. And they take that kind of unconditional support of the Israeli regime to Congress, where they have more votes automatically on their side in the Senate and House than any lobby in America, including the corporate lobby. How? Because they work hard. They have over 300,000 dedicated activists in the congressional districts, and they know everything possible about the senators and representatives, their families, their lawyers, their doctors, their accountants, their golf companions, their business associates, the staff in Congress, the staff back home. They work at it. And they are now seeing the bitter fruits of their mobilization since October 7th. So let's be very clear here about the U.S. government and Bibi Bush and Bibi Blinken's role here. They're not just shipping weapons constantly to the Israeli military. They're not just providing diplomatic cover with the veto in the UN. They're not just pressuring other countries to get in line. They are actually involved in combat preparation and combat operations, whether it's with the Houthis, whether it's in Gaza, the surveillance, the intelligence, supply, hunting for Israeli enemies along with the Israeli military, and also allowing what we all thought would be off limits, the incremental destruction of the West Bank, the thievery of the land, and the water proceeds at pace. Now it's extended to Lebanon. Now, Lebanon is officially our ally. Why are Bush and Blinken and Secretary of Defense allowing the destruction of Lebanon? Lebanon's our ally. They allow the incessant bombing of Syria. They allow the strife into Iraq, into Iran, the sabotage over the years, and the recent assaults, because they say that these countries are our adversaries. But Lebanon is our ally. We provide military equipment and support to the Lebanese army, which is inoperative under the present bombardment by Israel. So that raises a question of what are the Arab Americans doing in this country, which you know a lot about. But now, what are the Lebanese Americans who maybe didn't have a stake in the Palestinian Holocaust and the Israeli daily terror in Gaza and the West Bank? Now they have a stake in their ancestral home, Lebanon. And these Lebanese Americans are influential, more influential than Palestinian Americans. They involve retired generals who are Lebanese Americans, major business leaders, academics, religious leaders, people who have been elected to office at the state and federal level. Where are they?
Yes, where are they? And is there any hope that they can come forward and moderate this incredible bias? And I'm sure, Mr. Nader, you mentioned Bush and Blinken. You meant Biden and Blinken, but although the difference between Bush and Biden seems to be so small.
Oh yes, excuse me. Yes, it's BB Biden and BB
Blinken.
But you're right. It could have been BB Bush and BB Cheney.
Yeah, a very little change. But what hope is there, and is there a chance that if the Lebanese and other Arab and the constituency of peace in the United States come together to moderate, to constrain a bit this incredible support, this incredibly prolific and generous? I mean, I am baffled when I see that there are homeless people in the United States. There are people who are unable to eke a living after this vicious inflation, that the United States is so generous with Israel and the other Ukrainians, and not devoting the same money that could completely solve all the economic problems of the poor in the U.S. Why are they getting away with it this way?
Because they have to have a more muscular strategy and tactics on the Congress and the White House and in the media. Let me explain.
Yeah, please.
The first problem is that they have allowed the vast undercount of deaths and injuries in Gaza to be unchallenged. It's not 41,500. Those are the Hamas figures of identified people who have died in hospitals or brought to morgues. There are no more hospitals and morgues that are really operating. Hamas has an interest in lowballing the casualties because they don't want to be assailed by their international supporters and their own citizens for not being able to protect them at all and having any shelters at all, and underestimating the savagery of the Israeli attack after October 7th. Netanyahu and Biden also like an undercount for obvious reasons. The actual count is well over 300,000 deaths.
Wow.
And many more injuries. In fact, the doctors back from Gaza have told me that they hardly met anybody in Gaza who wasn't either sick, injured, or dying. And when I mention the Hamas figures, they react with total incredulity, saying, of course it's much higher. You can't drop 57,000 tons of bombs directly on civilian infrastructure, directly on schools, houses, apartment buildings, refugee camps, open air markets, hospitals, clinics, mosques, churches, ambulances, water mains, electric mains, stop the entry of food, medicine, fuel, electricity without massive casualties.
Yeah.
Just think, Gaza is the geographic size of Philadelphia, and there's nowhere to flee. You can't flee. You're trapped. Think what would be the casualties in Philadelphia, which would have operating hospitals and support from the outside, which is denied the Gazans. So one is to get highly publicized the enormous death toll, and I try to compare the following. The death toll of Palestinians in Gaza, 2.3 million people to begin with. The death toll since October 8th is greater than the number of people killed in World War II in Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and Dresden combined.
Wow.
That tends to get people's attention. There are about 235 to 240,000 people killed in those three cities. And those are in countries that had a combined population of over 160 million people, not 2.3 million. The second approach has to be in Congress, and that is to demand that prominent Israeli and Palestinian peace advocates who have been in touch with each other for years be allowed to testify before the House and Senate Foreign Relations Committee. These involve former ministers, mayors, prominent intellectuals, and retired people who worked in the equivalent of the Israeli FBI and CIA, and the Palestinians have their own prominence as well. Now, let AIPAC say no to those witnesses. So there needs to be a request by these people to testify. And once that happens, it breaks the iron grip of AIPAC on the Congress. And once the iron grip of 100% obeisance by most members of Congress, there are exceptions, as you know, then the fractures begin widening. The ability to speak out increases on Capitol Hill. The third is to demand that foreign reporters be allowed in Gaza. Netanyahu has blocked Israeli and all foreign reporters, including U.S. reporters, from going to Gaza, and Bibi Biden and Bibi Blinken have approved that. Well, that happens to be a very unpopular position in the national opinion. Very unpopular. You will even get pro-AIPAC people on Capitol Hill to be very reluctant to say, no, we don't want American reporters to go to Gaza to see how their billions of tax dollars are being used. Exactly. No. So there is a letter now that's about to be circulated by Congressman Jim McGovern. As you know, he's from Massachusetts.
Yes.
And he has written an open letter which he wants other members of Congress to sign, and you and others can help do that. That basically says to Bibi Biden and Bibi Blinken, drop your nickname and stand up for America, freedom of speech, the First Amendment, the right of the American people to know what genocides, what holocausts, what bloodshed are being committed with U.S. military support, economic support, and diplomatic support in Palestine and now in Lebanon. And the fourth thing that can be done that is quite effective is to go down and meet with the editors, the Boston Globe, meet with the editors of Washington Post, New York Times, and demand equal time. The reporting is very biased. You know, the New York Times refers to Hamas terrorists as what they call the Israeli vastly greater terrorism, military operations. And you can't use the word genocide if you're a reporter for the New York Times, all kinds of censorship. We know what the game is. But if you don't go down and meet with them face to face, and they'll meet with you, they have to appear safe, fair. They have to appear fair, at least initially. You're not going to start turning the media, and that holds true for the TV and radio as well, which is not reporting, allowing Israeli military censorship to control the day's reporting back from Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. And that's where the American reporters have to operate from, not inside Gaza. If you get the American reporters in Gaza and other reporters, French and British and Italian, you'll change the dynamics. The Israelis, even at this late stage, cannot operate with the devastating genocidal impact that they've been operating, killing over 170 Palestinian journalists, over 250 UNRWA relief workers, not to mention anything in Gaza that moves and anything that stands. This is the most devastating bombarded area conceivable in modern American history, and they're still at it with U.S. support. So those are some of the things that can be done to start breaking the grip of AIPAC and its associates. And the other thing is ask the media why don't they investigate AIPAC? You know, they have features on lobbying groups in Congress, and there hasn't been a single feature looking into AIPAC by the Washington Post, New York Times, or Wall Street Journal. Why not? I mean, it's the major factor in Congress. Nobody can say it's not newsworthy. So there are various things that can be done, and working with a Jewish Voice for Peace, if not now, standing together, of courageous younger generation, mostly Jewish Americans, taking on this AIPAC lobby in very creative, dynamic, and visible manner, as you know, coast to coast, all over the country. And so it's a great opportunity for Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, Lebanese Americans, Jewish Americans to form a new phalanx for peace in the Middle East and cease fire immediately, allow humanitarian trucks in, which are paid by the taxpayer, and start putting the pressure on this Israeli terrorist regime that there are going to be serious consequences for their role in the world if they continue on this destructive path. I might add, the prominent Israelis who sent that letter to Congress to ask Congress to disinvite Netanyahu had a stunning phrase. They said, Netanyahu is destroying Israel.
Yes. This is an excellent presentation, excellent advice for people who are concerned about the region and working to stop this genocide and carnage. It's very practical. I mean, what you're really saying is you're breaking some new things. I think it's an excellent way of presenting the counterpoint. I mean, the news that you were and the numbers that you mentioned, 300,000 from a population of 2.3 million. This is probably one of the largest casualty rate in any war. including the Second and the First World War, and even prehistoric things. This is a decimation of an entire population. The idea that you really have to start testifying in Congress. I mean, this is a democracy. And if it's a democracy, you would believe that they will give the other side, they would like to hear all sides. So this is a very practical thing for the Lebanese and the Palestinians and others to demand, to insist on the right to inform Congress before they inform the rest of the world of these things. This is an exception, a very practical thing. And what about foreign reporters? We talk about free press, about the right of the Americans to know. That would be an excellent idea too. And meeting the editors. And what is so true, Mr. Nader, is that this is not only good for United States, is good for us in Canada, good for the Europeans. I mean, we need to know how to work. The Zionist and the pro-Israeli groups have a monopoly on the information and the contact and the influence. And it's about time that our community, despite its limited means, they could do something more effective. And you have outlined it in a very succinct and fantastic way.
There's one more approach. This is a war of words, not just a war of weapons. And the main weapon that AIPAC is always utilized is accusing anybody who challenges Israeli empire in the Middle East with anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Well, as you know, Jim Zogby, the founder of the Arab American Institute, has written a speech which he delivered at an Israeli university years ago titled The Other Anti-Semitism. There is anti-Semitism with military destructive force against the Arabs in Palestine.
Yeah.
Arabs are Semites. The Jews do not dominate the Semitic race language. There's anti-Semitism against Jews, but there's far more now destructive, life-taking anti-Semitism against Arabs. Absolutely. And that is what has to be conveyed at universities and colleges all over the country, where the censorship hammer is coming down on people who oppose the genocide, who oppose Netanyahu's destruction and creation of the Palestinian Holocaust. They're the ones who are losing their jobs, who are being canceled, who are not being promoted, whose events are being turned off. It's not the people on campus who are supporting the Netanyahu regime.
Yeah.
They don't get fired. So it's quite clear that free speech is permitted on one side, but punished at places like Columbia University on the other. And the only way to unlock this is to create a significant and fact-based accusation, when it is applicable, of anti-Semitism against Arab Americans and anti-Semitism against Palestinians and Arabs in the Middle East. The Netanyahu regime and their lobby in this country do not own the word anti-Semitism. If they are allowed to do so, they will have the most potent weapon against free speech in this country, which is the reservoir, the foundation of a just and democratic and peaceful society.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there is another one which I heard you before alluding to, and this is the reversal of the victimizer and victim. The Israelis could kill, could destroy, and they remain the victim. And what about the poor people? Today, 7th of October, 1 year on the event that took place then, people are mourning and extending their support to the Israelis who lost 1,200. Absolutely, any civilian dead, no matter where, is definitely a problem. But what about the 300,000 Palestinians? And I don't know how many now in Lebanon. Why aren't these people considered human? And that there is any mention of their blood.
It's the racist devaluation of Palestinian and Lebanese lives. We know that. They don't count.
Yeah.
And it's way over 300,000. There will be close to 1 million by
Wow.
the end of the year because they're dying from the bombardment produced diseases and deprivation of food, the deadly contaminated water. 5,000 babies are born every month into the rubble in Gaza. No mother's milk, no food, no health care, no shelter.
No shelter.
90% have no shelter. The Israeli military has just ordered, once again, 300,000 Gazans in the north to evacuate. To where? There's debris and destruction everywhere. There's no civilian infrastructure. No water mains are working. No fuel, no electricity. Think of the devastation on the mental health of these people, especially these children, listening to the deadly whine of armed drones 24 hours a day. People in Boston get upset with sirens once in a while going through their neighborhood. Try being under these drones. You don't know when the missile's going to hit where you're sheltered under a makeshift tent without any support whatsoever, huddling with your children.
Yeah.
So it's got huge infant mortality and serious wounds that cannot be treated, leading to sepsis and death. The doctors have all documented this. It's all available. The first letter was signed by 48 doctors back from Gaza, led by people like Dr. Feroz Sirwa, who's been on Amy Goodman and been on our radio podcast. And now he has increased the number to over 90 doctors, nurses, healthcare workers back from Gaza who've actually seen the bloody scene, have seen the grisly executions by Israeli soldiers, who have seen the ambulances and hospitals blown up, who have seen the lack of antibiotics and pain relief medicine, and are putting it in letters to President Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris twice now, and there's no acknowledgement from the White House. They want to meet with President Biden and Dr. Jill Biden, whose famous statement in December, when she saw the slaughtering of children in satellite photographs in Gaza, she turned to her husband, Joe Biden, and said, quote, stop it now, Joe, end quote.
Yeah.
He defied his own wife's wise wisdom because he's essentially a coward. He's a feeble coward. He is the tail of Netanyahu. And he can't extricate himself to stand for the American national interest and for an immediate ceasefire and humanitarian aid and reparations in Gaza. These hundreds of thousands of victims had nothing to do with October 7th. They're being slaughtered under the war crime known as collective punishment and direct destruction of civilian infrastructure. So we need to call the situation by its right names, and it helps the cause in this country for justice and peace in the Middle East to remember that it was David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, considered the founder of Israel, who told Nahum Goldman, the head of the World Zionist Organization, in a frequent quoted passage in the Israeli media, to summarize it, quote, it was their land and we took it. Why would any Arab government engage in an agreement with us? And what Ben-Gurion was basically saying was, out of the Holocaust by the Nazis in World War II, he and others were not about to indulge in the land and human rights of the indigenous population in Palestine. It was their land, and Ben-Gurion said he and others took it. The second quotation was by Ariel Sharon, years later on Israeli radio when he said he told Shimon Peres, a former prime minister, who was edgy about pushing the United States too far and getting a pushback. He said, I keep telling Shimon, don't worry about America. The Jews control America. Don't worry about it. Those are his words.
Yeah.
Ariel Sharon, the prime minister for a good number of years of the state of Israel. So it's good to go back and quote these people. Now, Abba Eban, who was a scholar and fluent in Arabic and a former minister and ambassador to the UN on behalf of Israel, he's quoted in 1982, I believe, as saying that the Israeli military policy has always targeted the civilians purposefully. He used the word purposely. And the rest of the quote is very, very candid. And the same time, about 3 years earlier, the chief of staff in Israel said, of course, the Israeli military's policy is to target civilians. So much for the propaganda in the United States among some newspaper columnists like Charles Lane and Ruth Marcus in the Washington Post, or the Netanyahu voice in the New York Times, Brett Stevens, that the Israeli military doesn't target civilians. And so it's very important to quote Israeli human rights groups, people like the Refuseniks, Breaking the Silence, the great civil rights group in Israel, Beth Salem, which means House of Peace.
House of Peace.
And they know what's going on. They're accurate, they're brave, they're courageous, they're relentless. So it's important for advocates in the U.S. to quote these histories to validate the intensity and accuracy of their policy arguments in Congress and before the media and before the White House.
Superb. I just one a bit. You mentioned the word reparation, and as a lawyer, you must have dealt with lots of situations where there is restitution, compensation. I mean, the reparation bill should be huge. Why have the Palestinians, Lebanese, have refrained for some reason from tallying all this cost and presenting the bill? The Israelis went to the Germans and did a program called Wiedergutmachen, make things good again, and got billions of dollars. It's time for the Lebanese, the Palestinians, to come up with their bill and their invoice for all the destruction and death and decimation that they have visited.
Of course, the U.S. legally is a co-belligerent in an illegal war. For example, our military operations amount to a declaration of war.
Yes.
On behalf of Israel against the Palestinians. Well, only Congress can declare war. So right away, Biden is violating the Constitution. The second is he's violating 6 federal statutes, such as the Foreign Assistance Law, the Leahy Human Rights Law, which effect say that there are conditions established by Congress that have to be met before weapons can be shipped and sold or given away to any foreign country.
Yes.
And all 6 of those statutes are being violated by Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the State Department and the Defense Department. They're violating their own laws, and the Congress, the vast majority of Congress, is happy with that. They're violating laws passed by a prior Congress. That's okay for criminal legislators like Senator Lindsey Graham and Senator Thomas Cotton and some Democrats. So we in this country, when we hear Biden say, nobody's above the law, we must observe the rule of law, we have to call them out on this. And we can call them out with irrefutable legal arguments on the statute books at the present time, and reports by credible reporters and human rights groups. And we got to focus on that. And the third is, of course, Biden and Harris are violating international law. They're violating the Geneva Conventions, defining war crimes. As this program is being relayed to your audience, the Israeli military is using depleted uranium in Beirut, bombarding Beirut with depleted uranium, making the artillery hardened, and spreading radioactive death to vulnerable civilians in Beirut. That's a war crime.
It's a war crime.
They used white phosphorus in southern Lebanon, and in prior occupations of southern Lebanon, they dropped tens of thousands of cluster bombs that looked like toys that attracted children in southern Gaza, picked them up, and were blown apart.
Yeah.
This is massive, massive genocide.
Yeah. You mentioned the United States as a co-belligerent. As a lawyer, is there grounds for putting the United States in a position where it has to be paying reparations for all the damages they and the Israelis have inflicted on the people?
Well, yes. I mean, when you violate international law and destroy life and property indiscriminately, one might add, you're bound to pay for the damage.
Yes.
Now that's very unlikely to happen, although the U.S. will try to get the Gulf countries to bring some billions of dollars if there's anything left of Gaza to rebuild. That will occur, we hope. But as you say, the money from Congress is one way. It goes to Tel Aviv. It doesn't go to Palestine. And the point you made was well taken, that another approach or strategy is to get progressive mayors of cities to show in concrete ways what that $14 billion extra dollars that went to Netanyahu could have built and rebuilt schools, modernized public transit, made drinking water systems safer, got the lead out of drinking water that's hurting so many impoverished minority youngsters in this country, all over the country. Health care, child care, and if they list the specific projects in their own towns, Boston, Hartford, Wichita, Albuquerque, Helena, Montana, if they do that, then the Congress gets a different kind of message. But just imagine all the desperate needs for an impoverished society in the U.S. I mean, 60% of the workers in this country are living paycheck to paycheck.
Paycheck, yeah.
While the CEOs are making, $1 million every 2 weeks. The workers are seriously deprived. Now, it's a good sign that the labor unions, for the first time, are speaking out against the genocide in Gaza. And that is a real breakthrough that can be elaborated. And that took a lot of work by a few dedicated unionists in the UAW and elsewhere to make SEIU and other unions take a stand, and even the AFL-CIO, which has usually been knee-jerk pro-Israeli can do no wrong government supporter, buying and promoting the purchasing, by the way, of Israeli bonds, even they came out with a statement. So the opposition is diversifying. It's increasingly a collaboration between Jewish and Arab Americans, and now Lebanese Americans, we hope. And the breakthrough will come.
And hopefully soon. Mr. Nader, I tell you in all truthfulness that we could spend hours, days with you. The incisive and the considerate and knowledgeable way you present things are incredibly important. And at this time, the people that are standing on the side of justice and peace need this advice that you have really provided. It's a workable, feasible, simple things. But as you said, it
well,
needs
also people who don't care about the Middle East in this country, they should know it's not just what's going on there; it's what the Israeli control, government control of U.S. policy is doing to our country. It's stifling free speech. It's it's distorting life on universities with biased sanctions against opponents of genocide in violation of federal laws, and allowing the proponents to speak as freely as they want. It's distorting Congress. It's distorting public budget priorities. It's further strengthening the military-industrial complex. Let's not forget that AIPAC has close ties with companies like Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, General Dynamics, Boeing, all the companies producing those 2,000-pound bombs, those missiles. They see huge sales and profits by supporting Israeli bombardment of Arab lands. And so let's not exonerate the military-industrial complex here and its influence to further the Palestinian Holocaust and the military interventions over the decades in the entire Middle East, overthrowing governments, supporting Arab dictators, stifling democratic movements, all from Washington, D.C.
Absolutely, absolutely. And the world is interconnected. Our humanity is indivisible. And what the American Congress and AIPAC and the military industrial complex are in one corner, and the people, those who strive for peace and for justice, are on the other side. And it's about time we get some sort of balance, some sort of access, so that the people can bring to the American people, who I am convinced would be persuaded and would be on the side. They have always been on the side of the underdog, and we have to give them a chance. And what they're really doing is they're undermining the reputation of the U.S. They're undermining its national interest by making it side with a genocide and with destruction and with subverting democracy in the Middle East.
Well, for the first time, public opinion is now shifting against the Israeli regime in the United States, even among Jewish Americans who despise Netanyahu. Netanyahu is despised by 3 out of 4 Israelis for other reasons, not just that he failed to protect them on October 7th. They're very critical of him on that. But he tried to disassemble the judicial independence in Israel, which led to massive street protests, hundreds of thousands of Israelis. And he's also under indictment and being prosecuted by Israeli prosecutors for corruption. So
he and
it's
his
not
wife.
Like he's popular in the area. We have to realize that the impact of the conflict over there is distorting the United States tremendously, which is why, by the way, the Department of Defense and the CIA have teams studying blowback, pushback, because they know that we cannot be immune forever from retaliation for what we've done, blowing apart entire extended families, 200-300 members of extended families that nothing to do with any violence whatsoever. And so they understand there may well be another 9/11, especially now where the drones can be built in this country inexpensively. They can all kinds of damaging weaponry now can be built by more and more people. So the military establishment is not talking about this publicly, but they're developing all kinds of scenarios of pushback, which is their word, blowback, they call it, which is their word for retaliation. So our country is being severely damaged in so many ways And we've got to get a grip and solve this problem in the Middle East, whether it's a single state solution with equal rights for Jews, Arabs, already is a single state for all practical purposes,
All kinds of
or a two-state solution, which seems to be fading into the background as the colonial takeovers of more and more of the West Bank make a single state solution a more likely alternative.
Well, this has really been one of the best programs I've ever been into, and listening to you is amazing. Not surprising. I mean, you've already established your incredible credentials and your support of the underdog and the protection of the consumer and bringing justice and presenting the best picture of the United States. It would really be a call not only to the Lebanese and Arabs for what you've said, but all the Americans who care about the reputation of their country and who genuinely believe in democracy and peace. What you have really outlined for all of us, a challenge that it would be great if we can meet it. And we need your help. And
your audience should log into nader.org, and they will get automatically my weekly column that has been written since the 1970s, free. Just go to nader.org and sign up. They can listen to my radio podcast, the Ralph Nader Radio Hour, where I have many good and accurate and humane people being interviewed who are not given adequate voice in the media in this country. And I've written a book that's very relevant to the present campaign. We're about a month away from the elections. And it's called Let's Start the Revolution and Build a Country That Works for Its People, Justice and Peace. It's very practical, very usable for listeners in your audience who want to become active, engaged, and meaningful citizens, which are the roots of our democratic society. It all starts with citizens. Almost all the justice we've ever had in our past starts with a few citizens conversing with one another, and then they have more people, and they become supported by public opinion. It reaches the attention of candidates and politicians. It's converted into law and better country.
Absolutely. And thank you for all these pearls of wisdom. And we'd love to have you again if you give us the chance. It has been a very illuminating discussion. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're very welcome, Atif, for your work, your effort, and your leadership of all citizen causes in this country.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.